Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Jake Jensen with me. Jake is an actor and a professor at Cal State Northridge. And one of the things I think you're going to hear about his story is how resilience is super important to anything you want to achieve in life. So, Jake, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So to start your story, growing up, you loved to play tennis. So talk a little about, what got you into tennis and, really falling in love with it more than just a hobby.
You know what? My earliest memories with tennis were my mom's a very good player, and she would play with her sister, my aunt, every Saturday morning. And I would tag along, and then she would always like play with me, after they would play an hour and a half. And I just, for whatever reason, I just always loved it. And you know, my mom got me going, and then when I was about 13, she realized that I needed probably a coach other than her, especially teenagers with mom as coach doesn't work that well. But we continued, it was a family thing, the two of us. We continued to play, and we actually still play mother-son national tournaments together. Even, we've won a couple of them and play like 3 or 4 times a year. We meet up somewhere in the country and play these. So it's been a lifetime like thing that I do with my mom, and I played in college. I played a little bit of low level like pro events, so I got to a pretty good level. And but honestly, just uh, to still be able to do that with my mom at this point of my life is really, really cool.
It's amazing. Now, talk a little about, progressing from high school to college. I think, tennis is one of those sports that, wonderfully you can play for a really long time, but I think there's a lot of people that it can be so intensive as a kid that they almost burn out by the time, college rolls around or certainly once college is done. So talk a little bit about that for you, like being in high school, kind of falling in love with it, and then, the college years.
You know, I see a lot of players that are like start burning out when they get to college. I was lucky because it was always fun for me, and I think I didn't really like specialize in it until about 13 or 13 was when I really like was like, okay, this is going to be my sport. I mean, I had done it with my mom and stuff, but I had done other sports. I also played the piano. I did a lot of I was way into horses, horseback riding. So I think the fact that I like had done a lot of different things allowed me. Maybe it held me back initially, but I think ultimately, like when I got to college, I was still really hungry to play versus a lot of the guys that I even grew up with were already kind of burning out by the time they got to college. So I was lucky in that sense. I think that I was just getting hungrier when I got to college rather than like, oh my gosh, I've done this for so long, I'm kind of sick of it.
That makes perfect sense. Now, another pivotal part of your college journey was as you were getting ready to graduate, you had a professor take you to lunch and ask a question that planted a seed or maybe made you think about something. So talk a little bit about that lunch.
Yeah, Dr. Schwartz was one of my English professors and just a real mentor for me. And he took me out to lunch the week I graduated, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "If you could be anything, what would it be? But don't answer out loud. Just
Hmm.
just think it."
Yeah.
And honestly, at that point, I really didn't. I mean, I probably a tennis pro is what I really wanted to be, but I knew, that's a really hard lifestyle if you're not top, 50 in the world.
Right.
But it was interesting. Like, just immediately came to my mind was I want to be an actor, and I was like, and I was actually really relieved he didn't want me to say it out loud because I'm not sure at that moment I would have been like willing to say it out loud
Yeah.
because it was like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? But I will never forget that moment because it was like a seed that was planted, and I thought, that's coming from somewhere. I don't know. I mean, it really surprised me because that wasn't something that I'd really been thinking about at all, and it took me a relatively long time to be able to actually like say that out loud to anybody, and probably even to myself to like admit that that was something I would be willing to pursue.
Now, had you been in theater? Had you done acting before, or was this just something that you had a passion for? You
You
thought, hey,
know,
maybe that would be cool.
Yeah, just a few like school plays and stuff like that. One thing in high school, kind of an improv thing that I'd done that I really enjoyed. I'd taken a drama class, but nothing. I mean, I especially once I really got into tennis, and tennis was what I had pursued and focused on. So honestly nothing really since early teens. I hadn't thought about it at all. So that's why it surprised me so much.
Yeah. Now, to your point, I think there's that realization that I might be afraid to say it to someone because of their response, or I might even, be afraid to say it to myself out loud because that's so, left field. Where the heck did that come from? And having lived that, having experienced it, and then we'll get to the actual beginning of the acting career itself. But for you, someone listening right now is in the same boat, right? And if they ask themselves a question, there's an answer to the question that doesn't seem logical. It sounds crazy. Where the heck did that come from? What would be your encouragement to them to maybe step into it sooner, or as soon as they could, maybe?
I think if you have a thought or to do something or an intuition or I don't know what you even want to call it. I think just go for it. Like what are you out? You just never know what's going to kind of spark an interest or what's going to uh, you never know where it's going to lead. And I think I encourage because I teach, I'm a professor. I encourage my students if something is in your mind that you want to try, like go for it. Like there's no point in not trying because what's the worst? You fail at it, you learn, but even through that fail, to me, there is no failure. You learn
Yep.
something from it. But at least you won't have that little voice going, what if? What if? I to me that's the biggest thing. I don't like to have those what ifs. And so I just say like even if it doesn't work out that it becomes a career or something you really pursue, at least you know that you gave it a shot, that you tried, and I think you learned something from doing that, going out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely. Now, something other or interesting that you said also was, I'm actually kind of glad he told me not to say it out loud. And, something that I will share there, and I'd love to hear your perspective on that is sometimes there's these crazy things or seemingly crazy things that we want to do. And if we were to ask other people's opinions on it, it could squash that dream for us because we're listening too much to the outside voice and not willing to listen to ourselves more than the outside voice. So, talk a little bit about that in, maybe holding it close to the chest as you're figuring it out, but then being willing to pursue it even if there are outside voices saying, what, Jake, what are you thinking? Why would you do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I first had that thought of acting, I mean, I'm, early 20s, still very much, what would my parents think about this? What
Yeah.
would and my parents, I have a lot of respect and trust, and I actually have learned I can actually share, especially my mom, anything with. But at that time, it's still like, well, what would they think? Would they just think that's ridiculous? And so, I think sometimes it's okay to keep things close and not necessarily share it. But I think also I've realized as I've gotten older that people certain people that we think maybe wouldn't be supportive would be. And so, I mean, I maybe would have benefited from verbalizing it a little earlier. At the same time, I had to be ready for that moment as well. And so I don't think again there's a right or wrong.
Yep.
Um, but I think sometimes people surprise us by they'd be more supportive of it than we think.
That's great. I love it. So that question is asked, but it's not immediately actionable, and so you end up getting a master's, getting a PhD, and wanting to pursue the educational route. So talk a little bit about where the passion came from for that, and then what you teach.
Yeah, I after college I started coaching tennis and then decided to get a master's degree, which in sports psych I got a master's degree and then I did love it and I actually wanted to pursue it further. So I went to Tennessee for my PhD. They have a very strong sports psychology program there. And about a month in, I was like, I was ready to drop out.
Yeah.
Really glad I didn't because ultimately it's opened a lot of doors and something I really love. But I also at that moment realized I need to pursue the entertainment industry.
Mm.
And so I started out much more with modeling and commercial acting, which was a safer space to for me to try it out because I didn't feel like I needed as much acting training. And I'm not saying there's not skill involved with like commercial acting because there is,
Yeah, right.
but a lot of times it's based more on do you have the right look?
Yep.
And so for me, it was like, okay, even though I don't have a lot of experience or training, I have a certain look. Booked a few things, went to Florida when I was off like from school, immediately booked like a national commercial for Fiat. They wanted a lifeguard look and I had it. Played all like during the NBA finals. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. So I was lucky in that sense that I was able to like pursue it in a kind of a less intimidating space. It was more like I can do this. This is fun. And then, well, we can talk about this later, but moving to LA is a whole different ball game with the acting. But I was lucky in that sense that at that point I was like, I can do school, but I can also pursue that. I don't have to, doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah,
I can do both.
I love that. Now, just a couple of things. So, talking on the sports psychology side, that has been a world that has just grown exponentially in the last 20 years. I mean, I remember growing up and you tried to find a book on like mental toughness and whatnot, and there was like one or two books as it pertained to sports. And today, there's a bunch of information on that. But I think something that is unanimously true, the person that has the most talent doesn't always have the sharpest tools right between them, or they don't have the most confidence. So, talk a bit about some of the findings and things you've learned in the world of sports psychology through your PhD, but also as teacher.
Well, I obviously believe that everybody can benefit from doing some mental training.
Yeah.
For me, I was good at tennis, but I wasn't the most, I would say, like natural talent.
Hmm.
And the mental side of it wasn't a real strength of mine either. And I think that's, for me, the fact that I actually struggled with pressure and anxiety on the court and, handling difficult situations from a mental perspective, I think that actually allowed me to go, hey, I can help others with this. Like
Mm,
I need to work on it myself.
yeah.
And so I think the greatest athletes in the world can still benefit from it, but I think especially those of us that maybe didn't, that wasn't a strength of ours, the mental game, that we really can work on it in a systematic approach rather than just, I mean, I think experience helps, but a lot actual training the mind can really, really help. And that's what I love about what I do is to actually see athletes like systematically working on strengthening the mental game.
Yeah. So using tennis as a specific example, I think, there's very few sports where it's you and you alone, right? You can be great at basketball, but you got four other teammates. You can be great at football, but you got 10 other teammates. And in tennis, at the end of the day, it is 1v1, right? Or maybe 2v2. So there's not a lot of fingers to point in a blame game other than to yourself on, shoot, I could have done that better. Shoot, I should have done this better. So talk a bit about, handling that, in the environment of athletics and dealing with some of those stressors and how to overcome that. And, maybe it's the visualization beforehand. Hey, when it doesn't go right, right? How do I then respond? Opposed to just assuming everything's going to go perfectly and not having an answer for when things don't.
Yeah, I think in individual sports, which I work with team sports as well, but I work more with individual sport
Yeah.
athletes. If you're having a bad day, you can't sub some, I mean, you're out there on the court. There's nobody you can't sub somebody in. So you have to learn. I think part of it's accepting the fact that you're not going to be playing your best every single match.
Yeah.
So you actually have to figure out ways especially on those days where you're not feeling well, you're not matching up well against this opponent, your things are not going well. You have to figure out ways to turn it around. And I think part of it is just actually preparing for that, you know, team sport, if you're having a bad day, somebody subs in for you, or you sub out or you don't play. Where it's very hard I mean, once you're out there on the court, there's no options for that. So I think that part of what I do is helping athletes actually prepare for. There's not going to be every day that you're in that zone, you're playing well. So let's prepare for when you're not and ways to work through that. And some of that is visualization, imagery, imagining yourself when things aren't going as well. How do you turn that around? How do you manage that both external but also internal pressure when it's just you and there's nobody out there to help you with that. And that's what to me makes individual sports so interesting from a mental perspective is a lot of times you don't have a coach out there with you, you don't have a teammate, it's just you, and it
Yeah.
can be very solitary. So how do you work through that? And you have to be your own coach.
Absolutely. Now, for you as you're, working with different people, everyone is different. And so I'm going to ask you a question where the answer is, well, Phil, everyone's different, but maybe you can give what are, two or three maybe mental toughness takeaways that someone listening right now is saying, yeah, there are days where I show up to the office and I'm just not, I'm not my best because, the kids were sick or I didn't get a good night's sleep or, me and my spouse have been arguing, but I still need to show up and do the job, right? And to your point, I think everyone can benefit from, sports psychology, even if you're not playing a sport, because life is a lot like sports and competition and the mental head trash that we have. So maybe what are two or three great, tidbits or things someone can do to improve their mental toughness?
No, that's a great question. One very simple technique is just focusing on your breath.
Mm,
It brings you into the moment. It helps calm the thoughts that get, our cognitive thoughts that are all over the place. But it also, increases oxygen in the body, which helps us feel better. So it has a very grounding effect, and it's amazing. It's something we do all the time, breathing. But when you really pay attention to your breath, and it's interesting if when people start paying attention to their breath, often without even trying to change it, just noticing, is it up? Is my breath short and shallow?
mm,
When we're stressed, when we're going a million miles an hour, our breath tends to get up here. And just by noticing it and paying attention, it often brings it down more into our diaphragm without even trying.
yep.
But even just couple moments of noticing it can help just kind of settle everything. And it's something we can do no matter where we're at. We can do it driving, we can do it giving a presentation, we can give it public speaking, we can give it sports, we can do it in an audition as actors. Just pay attention to the breath.
Yep.
So that's one thing. And I think self-talk. We
Yeah.
are so, as adults especially, I would say the research really shows that about 70% of our thoughts, that inner dialogue, is negative by the time
Yeah.
we're adults. And if we can I don't mean shift it to like 100% positive, but if we can just reframe some of those thoughts too, instead of I'm so stressed, I'm so flustered, just to I'm okay. One of my favorites is just when I have those negative thoughts is thank you, but not right now. Like that's
Yeah.
not helpful right now.
Yep.
Maybe it's something I need to think about and address later tonight or later in the day, but thank you, but not right now or not today.
Love that.
Those are just two really simple. And then I do a lot with noticing dropping tension from the body. So just even
Mm,
noticing, like I get really tense back here,
yeah.
shoulder, like just noticing that tension and just even with the breath, like releasing that. And I've shifted from even saying like relaxing in the moment because a lot of times it's like I don't want to be too relaxed, especially
Yeah.
when I'm performing, but I do want to drop tension from the
Mm,
body.
that's
So
really
instead of
good.
like relaxing, I'm like drop tension. If
Yeah.
I can just drop that tension 10%, I'm already gonna feel better.
Yep. I
So
love
that's
it.
a couple simple things that I would recommend.
Well, and I think, on the negative thought comment, to your point, to say I'm gonna have 100% positive thoughts is just not realistic, right? No one has that. But if you can recognize the negative thought, I always kind of view it as you can stop the dominoes from continuing to fall, right?
Yes. Yep.
After two or three dominoes fall, hey, if I can stop it, that'll leave all the other dominoes still standing. But what happens frequently is I get one negative thought, and then it just becomes, the dominoes, the avalanche, occurs in my
Yeah.
mind.
No, I love that. That's a great analogy, and I might steal it from you and use it. But I like that too, that when you do noticing a couple breaths before it, that kind of calms you down enough to be aware of like, okay, I've had these two or three negative thoughts. Let's not let the dominoes all fall.
Yeah.
And so I like the breath first because it kind of settles, and then it's like, okay, and now let's notice our thoughts and let's not let it snowball or domino effect.
It's
So I
great.
think that's great.
Love it. So, as you're living in California and you've had a few of these, um, you know, shoots or commercials that you've been able to part of, I'm sure that builds confidence. And yet, California, there's a lot of people that want to have a similar role. So, talk a little bit about, getting into that industry because you do have to. I would say probably like create, your book of work. All the while, it's that one opportunity, right? It's getting that chance, and you have to just keep showing up because I'm sure, as you'll share with us, you can show up to a lot of things that you think you'd be a great fit for, but there's a lot of other people that are competing for that same job. So talk a little bit about venturing into a bit more of the acting in the California landscape.
Yeah, there's one casting office in LA that posts every time you go in. It says there were 3,000 submissions for this role that you're coming in
Wow.
for. We're only bringing in 100 people. You're one of those 100. Pat yourself on the back.
Yeah.
And it's encouraging in some ways, but then you go, oh my gosh, for this one role, there were 3,000 submissions of probably 3,000 people that have a very similar age look to what I have. And it is hard to, so that's the kind of overwhelming to think about that.
Yep.
But then you do have to pat yourself on the back and go, hey, out of those 3,000, something I'm doing allowed me to be chosen.
Yep.
That's a victory because it's easy to leave that, not book it, and go, what, there's one more audition that I didn't book.
Yep.
And we all go through, most of us go through that as actors where we go months at a time feeling like I'm doing good work, I'm auditioning well, I'm not booking like, and I think there has to be some reflection of, well, what do I need to keep working on? But I think at the same time you have to go, the fact that I'm getting a call back, the fact that I'm getting these auditions, that's already a victory.
Yep.
I can't get too discouraged even though I'm not booking the roles. And that's a constant reminder I think that we as actors have to be doing because you've auditioned 40 times and you're not booking something, that can get really discouraging really fast.
Absolutely. Now, to talk through a little bit on your acting side, and we'll tie in the tennis in you and the acting. So, King Richard, which was a movie that kind of portrayed, the Williams sisters growing up and Will Smith in it, and that's a job that you booked. So, talk a little bit about, being on set and being a part of that, and then talk about the cut.
We'll talk about a roller coaster
Yeah.
as an actor. That was about as much of a roller coaster as you could get. So, I got the audition. It was about five different scenes because they were obviously bringing people in that could play like five different roles. They were
Yeah.
all kind of coaches, pro shop kind of tennis pro. I mean, they were, and so I prepared them all. The audition went great. I went into the office. I felt like it was one of those where I walked in, I felt like I just nailed it, and ended up booking one of the roles. Yeah, I can't even remember the exact name of the role, but I booked it. I even had my wardrobe fitting, like everything was set, and then COVID hit. So, I mean, my wardrobe fitting was April 6th and of 2020, and then COVID hit in like March. I mean, I had even had a conversation on the phone with the wardrobe stylist and everything. And then about 2 weeks into after that, my agent called me saying they're stopping production completely. We don't know when it's going to start, and they're dropping your role. So, talk about a punch in the stomach.
Yeah.
Then in sometime later that summer, then my manager called me and said, "Well, your role was cut, but they're trying to find a smaller role for you, so at least you'll be in it," which ended up shooting in October of that year. And then it was a smaller role, but it still was a speaking role. I was on the phone with Will Smith.
Yeah.
Um, he's talking about like trying to sell, my daughters are going to be number one in the world, and I'm like, who is this guy? Like, you've got this, 11 and 12-year-old daughter, and you think they're going to be number one in the world. They don't even have like a junior record. It's a fun role. I got to work with Will Smith. I got to work with Tony Goldwyn, who plays a coach in there.
Yeah.
So it was, he was on Scandal, pretty, so a couple, great actors, really great experience. And then, but I didn't know if I made the final, edit till I was in Warner Brothers Studios with my manager and we showing of early showing of the film, and I had obviously my scene got cut. So that's like another punch in the stomach.
Right.
But you know, I mean, looking back, it was an amazing experience. I got to be on set with very well-known actors. The movie, I was very, you know, it turned out great. But obviously, you know, just the roller coaster of thinking you're in it. And I know that's always with these smaller, you know, roles, there's always a chance that in the editing room it's going to get cut.
Yeah.
But doesn't make it easy to see or not see
Yeah.
when you
No,
realize it.
no doubt.
So
Now, another movie, once again, tennis related, the Challenger, is a movie that you were in. So talk a bit about, getting that role in the movie itself.
yeah, I mean, I think again, you know, my tennis background helped me get the audition, which I'll whatever it takes. I mean, I'm happy for that. Another fun audition. I got to do it actually in English and Danish. They wanted a Scandinavian tennis player, so you had to do the scene in both English but also in a Scandinavian language, which I'm 100% Danish on both sides, but I don't speak Danish. So I worked with a voice coach. We worked on the like Danish. I had to work on the Danish accent with English, but I also had to work on doing it in Danish. Um, Submitted the this was actually a self-tape because with COVID, most auditions went like you tape it at home and just send it in. Didn't hear anything for about a month, and then my manager called me. I was actually on the way to the airport to visit my parents, and he's like, "Don't leave LA. Like, you booked this role. They're flying you to Boston in a few days." Flew to Boston. Was there about 9 days.
Oh,
Shot 2 days, but they had me there 9 days just because they didn't know exactly the schedule and flew me first class to Boston, picked me up in a limo. I was in the same hotel as Zendaya and Josh O'Connor and Mike Face, who star in the movie. So it was probably the first time I really felt like a movie star because they
yeah.
of the way they treated me, which was awesome. And then that I shot two scenes. One did get cut, but then the locker room scene I did make it into that. Again, just another incredible experience to work with those actors and kind of get treated like a movie star.
Yeah. Now, the thing that I think is a great takeaway is all the mental, training you had done in tennis and the mental training you had done in your PhD, right? And what you teach and what you coach, ends up being super prevalent in the world of acting, right?
Yeah.
If only you got every job you showed up for, if only, everyone just called you for the casting and you didn't have to just put yourself out there. But then to have the resilience when you don't hear back or when you get it, but you don't end up in the movie to be able to show up and continue to do that. So talk a bit about just your mental toughness and how that's been developed with what you're doing now in the acting space.
Yeah, you know, I think ultimately all of my tennis background as well as the mental training background has helped me as an actor, no
Yeah.
question. Initially, I didn't always feel like I was making the connection. It's like, okay, how do I take this mental training that I've applied to sports and apply it to acting? And I almost initially was kind of like judgmental of myself of like, why am I not transferring that better? But as I've been in LA now 10 and a half years and kind of worked through it, I realize now, just especially with the learning from each experience, bouncing back, staying positive, resilient, you know, nothing is a failure unless you don't learn from it. All of that I think has been, and then even just with auditions, you know, learning to manage the anxiety. Um, Interesting, like even with like visualization imagery, I do a different type of it with acting, but I absolutely use that a lot to prepare for certain roles or you know, it's different than necessarily preparing for a tennis match, but still that use of visualization imagery, seeing myself in a certain scene or character, a lot of those skills, I definitely the fact that I use them as an athlete help now with acting. I just kind of had to not judge myself because they're very similar, but there's also differences.
Oh,
So that's I think been the biggest challenge is just don't beat myself up over why am I not transferring the mental strength from one to the other. But I think I've gotten to a good place with that now where I do use it without judging it.
That's great. Now, something you mentioned earlier, and I don't like to say, small wins because sometimes that could be a big win to somebody, but, recognizing the wins along the way to the ultimate win, right? And I think so many times we don't do that, right? We say, well, my ultimate goal is to be, a co-lead in this movie. So I'm not going to acknowledge I was, 100 of 3,000, or, I got this scene but didn't make it, or I got this scene and it did make it, and realize that these are all stepping stones to whatever the ultimate goal is, right? So talk a little about just being willing to, acknowledge those wins that even if they're not the ultimate win, they're wins in a stepping pattern to get to where you want, and just how important it is to acknowledge that win on your way to the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important because if you're just waiting for we all have goals. Like, obviously, I want to have a series regular in a TV series,
Yeah.
or book a lead or a co-lead type role in a major film where there's no way I'm going to be cut out because I'm got so many scenes. But I think you have to appreciate something as simple as a few weeks ago in acting class, I performed a scene where my acting coach said, "That was a really courageous performance you just did." And,
Mm,
no, other than the 10 people in my class that saw it, nobody's ever going to see that performance. But just the feeling of it was a breakthrough performance for me, going, if I can do that here, I can do this when the time comes on set. That's a victory, even though only 10 people saw it,
yeah.
and and so I think that's something that's so important, that if I only count on the roles that I book, it could get very discouraging really quickly. But
Mhm.
there's so many of these moments. And, I've been lucky that every time I'm almost to the point where, am I ready to keep doing this? Should I give this up? I always have something that happens that like is a spark that
Mm.
keeps me going. And I don't know if that's just I'm open to that, or
Yeah,
it's I've been fortunate in that sense that there's something that's like, okay, this is a spark that's going to keep me at this, keep me going to keep working for what I want to get in this industry.
I love it. Well, Jake, are there any other stories that you just like to highlight that as you reflect back are pivotal in your journey?
Well, definitely for the sports psych, I don't know how familiar you are with the term the yips.
Yeah.
So it's a golf term, but we
Yeah.
apply it to a lot of sports where a motor or a motor skill like serving in tennis or throwing a baseball, or you basically get almost like a paralysis of doing it. And I got that on my serve in tennis in college, my last year. And I mean, I really thought I would never play a tennis match again. I mean, I thought if it literally like ended my college career. And I persevered. I worked with a sports psychologist after college. Took about 2 years to work through it. But it's also one of the main reasons I went into sports psychology, because I thought if the mind can be so powerful to like destroy performance, there's
Yeah.
got to be there's got to be ways to counteract that. And interestingly, in this last year, I've worked with a tennis player, a very good tennis player that's pro prospect that has the yips. I've worked with a volleyball player that had it in the setting yips,
Yeah.
where she would go to set and her hands literally like goes like this and the
Yeah.
ball goes wherever. I've worked with two golfers with the yips. So it's actually kind of come full circle where it's been very, very satisfying to not only work through it myself, but to help others. And I'm not sure if there's an exact equivalent in acting, but certainly like freezing up on
Mm.
stage, having that moment of just complete like black, going completely blank in an audition. I
Yeah.
think there are parallels there that I can help others with. So that was one of the most frustrating things I went through as an athlete, but
Yeah.
ultimately, I think completely shifted what I maybe career-wise ended up doing, and has made me it's incredibly satisfying to help others like work through something like that.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, Jake, I want to say thanks so much for sharing your journey and just highlighting some of the pivotal moments, and excited to continue to watch your journey, and can't wait to hear about the next movie you're in and see the large role you'll have. So thanks again for being on.
No, it's been great. I appreciate it. It's been fun.